With each press of a button, her energy gathers and grows. When I first played this quest, I didn't even understand what this minigame was meant to represent. Embarrassingly, I considered it some sort of rhythm game track bar. I am, however, lucky enough to be married to an obstetrics nurse. I have asked her to take a moment to explain to us what this minigame represents. What were you thinking when I first showed you this scene?
Well, I had to get to the visual, the minigame part, before I was like, oh, that reminds me of a fetal strip, particularly the contractions, because fetal strips have more than just the one part, contrary to popular belief. A fetal strip is usually comprised of two major components that are on top of one another. The top one is a heart rate, the fetal heart rate. Usually between 140 and 160 beats per minute is what you're looking for a normal heart rate while the baby's still in utero and being monitored. And then the bottom is the contractions, and those look different. Like, there's a visual difference between the two halves. And on mom's belly, it's monitored by these two circular devices, Toco monitor and the fetal monitor, that you have to keep moving around on the stomach to get placed because baby moves around in there. So you have to keep moving them to get the right, make sure they're on monitor. So, because something can go wrong very quickly if they're off monitor, or if they're on but they're in a weird position or sleeping or crashing.
So a lot of different problems.
Yes.
So the minigame is very abstract and very simplified. A lot of people call it the pregnancy QTE in the Warframe community. Would you say that it was more symbolic of the fetal heart rate or of the contraction monitor?
Weirdly, both, if that makes sense, because the way the minigame looked to me is the peaking and the valleying were uneven, inconsistent, which reminds me of the heart rate, but the shape and how the little marker moved reminded me of contractions. So it's almost combining both in a weird way. If they were more consistent with each of the mounds, I guess, I'd say contractions, but because there were like larger, big dips, big things, it looked like almost a baby in distress, heart rate wise, if it's so like up and down like that. So kind of both. Upon initial watch, I thought contractions, and I think I just put it in my head that it was just up and down, smooth and even. But upon rewatch, I realized it's a little bit more inconsistent than that. So I'd say both, just because of shape for contractions, inconsistency for heart rate.
Would you say that it was a good depiction of labor and delivery overall, the whole cutscene? Be honest.
It's hard because these aren't humans anymore. So in that regard, no. It's a very bare bones idea or like blueprint of what I imagine a lot of people think of when they think labor and how that looks. There's a lot more to it than that, but I might be a tad biased because of my experience with the whole thing. Yes and no, mostly no.
How would you say it compares to other media then?
About the same. I mean, it's definitely not the worst interpretation I've seen of the idea, but again, it's kind of an apples and oranges situation because most media gets it wrong with actual human beings at the forefront of the discussion. This one is kind of, I can't judge it or get too mad at it for any inaccuracies because of the nature of the story being told and the beings involved.
Because of the space magic.
Yeah, because of space magic. Yeah. That leaves a lot of room for some gimmies as far as inaccurate depictions.
So I guess last question, which is just giving you an open floor to talk about this topic to the fans of Warframe. What would you say is the biggest misconception people have about fertility, labor, delivery, and postpartum care? Your entire industry, essentially.
God, there are so many. I think the biggest thing that I keep seeing is how the labor process begins. I can go on and on, but I'm going to try very hard to keep it brief. Okay, so a woman is chilling at home, let's say, and their water breaks, and it's just like, oh God, we have to go right now, or the baby's going to slide out in about 10 minutes if we're not at the hospital right now when the water breaks. In actuality, well, that's what's called an SROM, spontaneous rupture of membranes, and it happens way less often than the media will have you believe. It's actually, I don't want to use the word rare, but it's definitely, you are less likely to break water on your own. Usually, when you're close, you have to be artificially ruptured. AROMs are way more commonplace than SROMs. Like, it does happen still, of course, spontaneous rupture of membranes, but just not as often as media would have you believe and how it's depicted. And you have roughly 18 hours to remain ruptured before it becomes a problem. It doesn't mean that baby is coming right then. You know, it takes time. Usually rupture of membranes can occur anywhere from 4 to 6 centimeters dilated, and then you still have quite a few more before you reach 10, which is full dilation. So you have 18 hours before you're at risk of infection or the baby being in trouble. Contractions do start hitting a lot harder when you are ruptured because the baby has lost that cushion of fluid to move around in, so you feel the contractions more. Fertility, that is a fascinating and complicated process that not a lot of people know a ton about, IVF and things of the like. It's a lot to get into. There are quite a few misconceptions in fertility as well. For instance, sometimes fertility issues aren't always the woman. Sometimes the woman's reproductive functions are perfectly healthy and it's the guy. Azospermia or motility issues with the sperms. It could be either one, which is why a full evaluation of both men and women are required for a fertility workup when someone is interested in undergoing treatment. It's both partners that have to be screened and looked at, and it could be one or the other. It's not always, they're undergoing fertility treatment because something's wrong with the mom's eggs or something's wrong with, her ability to get pregnant. Sometimes she's finding it's a guy. It's why both partners require semen analysis is just as important as a woman's workup when it comes to such things. Delivery process can take minutes, or it could take hours and hours, or you can be pushing for hours and hours and the baby's not moving and then a C-section happens. Not a lot of people do VBACs anymore because of the risk involved. VBAC is vaginal birth after cesarean. A lot of doctors don't want that smoke. So the most common thing is once you get a C-section, regardless of how the pregnancy goes, you're a C-section for every child you have subsequently. I don't agree with that personally, but it's just more the common practice with a lot of OBs around because the risk is so great, I guess. There's still a few out there who'll try it, and they end up going just fine, especially if it's a second or third child situation. I'm going to end up ranting about all the problems I've encountered in my time as a nurse, so I'm going to cut it right there. But that's pretty much my experience related to what I was shown on this Warframe minigame.
Well, then last one before we actually cut.
Okay.
About postpartum care. Any misconceptions about that you want to, or the big one that you want to let people know about?
So postpartum care is all-encompassing. Obviously, there's vaginal births and then your cesarean births. Either one is extremely traumatic to the human body, the female human body, or the body of those having the baby. It seems to believe that, after 1 or 2 days, you should be good. No, especially in the form of cesarean sections, which is something that bothers me again about, being in the hospital. They need a bed, so they're trying to get you out of there in 2 to 3 days max and try to get you up out of bed 6 to 8 hours post-surgery, post-op, which is ridiculous, but they need you up and functioning so they can send you home safely. But we get a lot of returns, people coming back because of blood pressure issues or bleeding issues within the week after they've been discharged. All in all, whether it's vaginal or whether it's cesarean, first of all, you get a baby either way. It doesn't matter how. Either way doesn't make you more or less of a mother than the other. There's a very ugly notion going around that people who underwent cesarean sections are to be shamed or felt less than because they didn't go through the whole labor process, which is awful and gross. That's not true. The recovery is so much worse. First of all, you're cut from hip to hip and a baby's pulled out of your abdomen. And the recovery process and healing process it's slow and it's painful, and there's a whole bunch of considerations to be taken as far as movement and toileting issues and a whole bunch of stuff that a lot of people don't think about until they go through it. Postpartum is vaginal, cesarean, you get your baby, doesn't matter. But also the body has experienced an extreme level of pain and trauma, and mom should be treated as such when that happens.
So the last thing you said when watching the quest was just the word devastating. And from what you've described, it can be a pretty devastating process to go through everything that it takes to get a baby. Do you want to end on a note of encouragement for people who are watching this and thinking about the family they just started or the family they're about to have?
When I was in labor, my favorite aspect of working labor was like the 5 to 10 minute period immediately after we get the baby out. It could have been absolutely horrid. Up to that point, everything could have went wrong. It's just, but like everything kind of stops when the baby's out and you hear that first cry, and then it all becomes worth it. So that was my favorite part, and like coaching the parents and like putting them skin to skin on mom or dad, because dads can do skin to skin too. That's something else. If you need skin to do skin to skin, you don't have to be well endowed or blessed to be able to do skin to skin. Like anybody can do it if they have skin and it's warm. Anyway, that part is always going to make anything that came before it or anything that comes after worth it. So if you're starting a family for the first time, congratulations, that's exciting. It's going to feel hard and you're going to wish you hadn't bothered a couple of times, but I guarantee you at the other end of it, you're going to forget about all that and it's going to be great. If you've already started a family, but you're in that weird, awful time where it's just like, oh God, what have I done? That's normal too. You have about 18 more years of hitting that wall over and over again. But in that immediate period, in the first couple of days after, I used to always like coach my parents on their way out on discharge day. It's just like, you're going to get home and you're going to feel like, oh God, now what? You're going to do fine. You're learning the child as the child learns about the world. So everyone's learning together. And there's no book. I know people are writing them and pretending like they're active how-to guides. Give me money and I'll tell you exactly how to be the perfect parent. There's no such thing. It's a scam. You're only going to know by doing. And when you do, it's going to be hard. It's going to be tough. There's going to be times where you're mad at each other, you're mad at the child, you're mad at yourself. And it's all part of it. Hang in there. It's going to get better and better and better. And then you'll be a pro. But you'll only get that from getting your hands in there and just sticking with it. You got this.
All right. Thank you for taking time out of your life to make my little Warframe videos for YouTube. I appreciate you very much, and I look forward to continue being married to you after this.
Yes, all of that sounds wonderful. I love you.
I love you too. My wife has worked in fertility clinics, labor and delivery, postpartum care, as well as in-home care for the first year of life. When I showed her this quest to get her opinion on what is about to happen, she knew exactly what this moment was expressing. She is too modest to admit it, but I would call my wife both an expert in women's healthcare and a hero to the hundreds of women whose babies she helped bring into the world. And thanks to her, we can understand this moment wherein a video game adapted the conventions of a rhythm game to give players a tangible moment of empathy for women in labor. As her light fades, Jade caresses Soren's cheek one last time. Swaddled in his arms is the fruit of her labor. Something entirely new has been created. a child born of a Warframe. The child's energy, Jade's light, now imbues their father with the strength to protect the one he loves. The Reaper abandons his hate for the sake of his family. With his child in tow, the Stalker fights his way out the oceans of Udanos, out of hell.